of Suez, some hold, the direct control of Providence ceases, man being there handed over to the power of the gods and devils of Asia, and the Church of England Providence only exercising an occasional and modified supervision in the case of Englishmen. This theory accounts for some of the more unnecessary horrors of life in India. It may be stretched to explain my story. My friend Strickland of the police, who knows as much of natives of India as is good for any man, can bear witness to the facts of the case. Dumois, our doctor, also saw what Strickland and I saw. The inference which he drew from the evidence was entirely incorrect. He is dead now. He died, in a rather curious manner, which has been elsewhere described. When Fleet came to India he owned a little money and some land in the Himalayas, near a place called Dhurmsala. Both properties had been left him by an uncle, and he came out to finance them. He was a big, heavy, genial, and inoffensive man. His knowledge of natives was, of course, limited, and he complained of the difficulties of the language. He rode in from his place in the hills to spend New Year in the station, and he stayed with Strickland. On New Year's Eve there was a big dinner at the club, and the night was excusably wet. When men foregather from the uttermost ends of the empire, they have a right to be riotous. The frontier had sent down a contingent to catch MLIVOS who had not seen 20 white faces for a year, and were used to ride 15 miles to dinner at the next fort at the risk of a Khyberry bullet where their drinks should lie. They profited by their new security, for they tried to play pool with a curled-up hedgehog found in the garden, and one of them carried the mark around the room in his teeth. Half a dozen planters had come in from the south and were talking horse to the biggest liar in Asia, who was trying to cap all their stories at once. Everybody was there, and there was a general closing up of ranks and taking stock of our losses in dead or disabled that had fallen during the past year. It was a very wet night, and I remember that we sang Auld Lang Syne with our feet in the Polo Championship Cup, and our heads among the stars, and swore that we were all dear friends. Then some of us went away and annexed Burma, and some tried to open up the Sudan and were opened up by fuzzes in that cruel scrub outside Swakim, and some found stars and medals, and some were married, which was bad, and some did other things which were worse, and the others of us stayed in our chains and strove to make money on insufficient experiences. Fleet began the night with sherry and bitters, drank champagne steadily up to dessert, then raw, rasping Capri with all the strength of whiskey, took Benedictine with his coffee, 4 or 5 whiskies and sodas to improve his pool strokes, beer and bones at 2:30, winding up with old brandy. Consequently, when he came out, at 3:30 in the morning, into 14 degrees of frost, he was very angry with his horse for coughing, and tried to leapfrog into the saddle. The horse broke away and went to his stables, so Strickland and I formed a guard of dishonor to take Fleet home. Our road lay through the bazaar, close to a little temple of Hanuman, the monkey god, who is a leading divinity worthy of respect. All gods have good points, just as have all priests. Personally, I attach much importance to Hanuman, and am kind to his people, the great grey apes of the hills. One never knows when one may want a friend. There was a light in the temple, and as we passed, we could hear voices of men chanting hymns. In a native temple, the priests rise at all hours of the night to do honor to their god. Before we could stop him, Fleet dashed up the steps, patted two priests on the back, and was gravely grinding the ashes of his cigar butt into the forehead of the red stone image of Hanuman. Strickland tried to drag him out, but he sat down and said solemnly, "She that mark of the beast. I made it. Isn't he it fine?" In half a minute the temple was alive and noisy, and Strickland, who knew what came of polluting gods, said that things might occur. He, by virtue of his official position, long residence in the country, and weakness for going among the natives, was known to the priests and he felt unhappy. Fleet sat on the ground and refused to move. He said that good old Hanuman made a very soft pillow. Then, without any warning, a silver man came out of a recess behind the image of the god. He was perfectly naked in that bitter cold, and his body shone like frosted silver, for he was what the Bible calls a leper, as white as snow. Also he had no face, because he was a leper of some years' standing and his disease was heavy upon him. We too stooped to haul Fleet up, and the temple was filling and filling with folk who seemed to spring from the earth, when the silver man ran in under our arms, making a noise exactly like the mewing of an otter, caught Fleet round the body and dropped his head on Fleet's breast before we could wrench him away. Then he retired to a corner and sat mewing while the crowd blocked all the doors. The priests were very angry until the silver man touched Fleet. That nuzzling seemed to sober them. At the end of a few minutes' silence one of the priests came to Strickland and said, in perfect English, "Take your friend away. He has done with Hanuman, but Hanuman has not done with him." The crowd gave room and we carried Fleet into the road. Strickland was very angry. He said that we might all three have been knifed, and that Fleet should thank his stars that he had escaped without injury. Fleet thanked no one. He said that he wanted to go to bed. He was gorgeously drunk. We moved on, Strickland silent and wrathful, until Fleet was taken with violent shivering fits and sweating. He said that the smells of the bazaar were overpowering, and he wondered why slaughterhouses were permitted so near English residences. "Can't you smell the blood?" said Fleet. We put him to bed at last, just as the dawn was breaking, and Strickland invited me to have another whiskey and soda. While we were drinking he talked of the trouble in the temple, and admitted that it baffled him completely. Strickland hates being mystified by natives, because his business in life is to overmatch them with their own weapons. He has not yet succeeded in doing this, but in 15 or 20 years he will have made some small progress. "They should have mauled us," he said, "instead of mewing at us. I wonder what they meant. I don't like it one little bit." I said that the managing committee of the temple would in all probability bring a criminal action against us for insulting their religion. There was a section of the Indian Penal Code which exactly met Fleet's offence. Strickland said he only hoped and prayed that they would do this. Before I left, I looked into Fleet's room, and saw him lying on his right side, scratching his left breast. Then I went to bed cold, depressed, and unhappy, at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 1 o'clock I rode over to Strickland's house to inquire after Fleet's head. I imagined that it would be a sore one. Fleet was breakfasting and seemed unwell. His temper was gone, for he was abusing the cook for not supplying him with an underdone chop. A man who can eat raw meat after a wet night is a curiosity. I told Fleet this and he laughed. "You breed queer mosquitoes in these parts," he said. "I've been bitten to pieces, but only in one place." "Let's have a look at the bite," said Strickland. "It may have gone down since this morning." While the chops were being cooked, Fleet opened his shirt and showed us, just over his left breast, a mark, the perfect double of the black rosettes, the 5 or 6 irregular blotches arranged in a circle, on a leopard's hide. Strickland looked and said, "It was only pink this morning. It's grown black now." Fleet ran to a glass. "By Jove," he said, "this is nasty." "What is it?" We could not answer. Here the chops came in, all red and juicy, and Fleet bolted 3 in a most offensive manner. He ate on his right grinders only, and threw his head over his right shoulder as he snapped the meat. When he had finished, it struck him that he had been behaving strangely, for he said apologetically, "I don't think I ever felt so hungry in my life. I've bolted like an ostrich." After breakfast Strickland said to me, "Don't go. Stay here, and stay for the night." Seeing that my house was not 3 miles from Strickland's, this request was absurd. But Strickland insisted, and was going to say something when Fleet interrupted by declaring in a shamefaced way that he felt hungry again. Strickland sent a man to my house to fetch over my bedding and a horse, and we 3 went down to Strickland's stables to pass the hours until it was time to go out for a ride. The man who has a weakness for horses never wearies of inspecting them, and when 2 men are killing time in this way they gather knowledge and lies the one from the other. There were 5 horses in the stables, and I shall never forget the scene as we tried to look them over. They seemed to have gone mad. They reared and screamed and nearly tore up their pickets. They sweated and shivered and lathered and were distraught with fear. Strickland's horses used to know him as well as his dogs, which made the matter more curious. We left the stable for fear of the brutes throwing themselves in their panic. Then Strickland turned back and called me. The horses were still frightened, but they let us gentle and make much of them, and put their heads in our bosoms. "They aren't afraid of us," said Strickland. "D'you know, I'd give 3 months' pay if Outrage here could talk." But Outrage was dumb, and could only cuddle up to his master and blow out his nostrils, as is the custom of horses when they wish to explain things but can't. Fleet came up when we were in the stalls, and as soon as the horses saw him, their fright broke out afresh. It was all that we could do to escape from the place unkicked. Strickland said, "They don't seem to love you, Fleet." "Nonsense," said Fleet, "my mare will follow me like a dog." He went to her. She was in a loose box, but as he slipped the bars she plunged, knocked him down, and broke away into the garden. I laughed, but Strickland was not amused. He took his moustache in both fists and pulled at it till it nearly came out. Fleet, instead of going off to chase his property, yawned, saying that he felt sleepy. He went to the house to lie down, which was a foolish way of spending New Year's Day. Strickland sat with me in the stables and asked if I had noticed anything peculiar in Fleet's manner. I said that he ate his food like a beast, but that this might have been the result of living alone in the hills out of the reach of society as refined and elevating as ours, for instance. Strickland was not amused. I do not think that he listened to me, for his next sentence referred to the mark on Fleet's breast, and I said that it might have been caused by blister flies, or that it was possibly a birthmark newly born and now visible for the first time. We both agreed that it was unpleasant to look at, and Strickland found occasion to say that I was a fool. "I can't tell you what I think now," said he, "because you would call me a madman, but you must stay with me for the next few days, if you can. I want you to watch Fleet, but don't tell me what you think till I have made up my mind." "But I am dining out tonight," I said. "So am I," said Strickland, "and so is Fleet. At least if he doesn't change his mind." We walked about the garden smoking, but saying nothing, because we were friends, and talking spoils good tobacco, till our pipes were out. Then we went to wake up Fleet. He was wide awake and fidgeting about his room. "I say, I want some more chops," he said. "Can I get them?" We laughed and said, "Go and change. The ponies will be round in a minute." "All right," said Fleet. "I'll go when I get the chops, underdone ones, mind." He seemed to be quite in earnest. It was 4 o'clock, and we had had breakfast at 1. Still, for a long time, he demanded those underdone chops. Then he changed into riding clothes and went out into the veranda. His pony, the mare had not been caught, would not let him come near. All 3 horses were unmanageable, mad with fear, and finally Fleet said that he would stay at home and get something to eat. Strickland and I rode out wondering. As we passed the temple of Hanuman, the silver man came out and mewed at us. "He is not one of the regular priests of the temple," said Strickland. "I think I should peculiarly like to lay my hands on him." There was no spring in our gallop on the racecourse that evening. The horses were stale, and moved as though they had been ridden out. "The fright after breakfast has been too much for them," said Strickland. That was the only remark he made through the remainder of the ride. Once or twice I think he swore to himself, but that did not count. We came back in the dark at 7 o'clock, and saw that there were no lights in the bungalow. "Careless ruffians my servants are," said Strickland. My horse reared at something on the carriage drive, and Fleet stood up under its nose. "What are you doing, grovelling about the garden?" said Strickland. But both horses bolted and nearly threw us. We dismounted by the stables and returned to Fleet, who was on his hands and knees under the orange bushes. "What the devil's wrong with you?" said Strickland. "Nothing, nothing in the world," said Fleet, speaking very quickly and thickly. "I've been gardening, botanizing, you know. The smell of the earth is delightful. I think I'm going for a long walk all night." Then I saw that there was something excessively out of order somewhere, and I said to Strickland, "I am not dining out." "Bless you," said Strickland. "Here, Fleet, get up. You'll catch fever there. Come in to dinner and let's have the lamps lit. We'll all dine at home." Fleet stood up unwillingly, and said, "No lamps, no lamps. It's much nicer here. Let's dine outside and have some more chops, lots of 'em and underdone, bloody ones with gristle. Now a December evening in northern India is bitterly cold, and Fleet's suggestion was that of a maniac. "Come in," said Strickland sternly. "Come in at once." Fleet came, and when the lamps were brought, we saw that he was literally plastered with dirt from head to foot. He must have been rolling in the garden. He shrank from the light and went to his room. His eyes were horrible to look at. There was a green light behind them, not in them, if you understand, and the man's lower lip hung down. Strickland said, "There is going to be trouble, big trouble tonight. Don't you change your riding things." We waited and waited for Fleet's reappearance, and ordered dinner in the meantime. We could hear him moving about his own room, but there was no light there. Presently from the room came the long-drawn howl of a wolf. People write and talk lightly of blood running cold and hair standing up and things of that kind. Both sensations are too horrible to be trifled with. My heart stopped as though a knife had been driven through it, and Strickland turned as white as the tablecloth. The howl was repeated, and was answered by another howl far across the fields. That set the gilded roof on the horror. Strickland dashed into Fleet's room. I followed, and we saw Fleet getting out of the window. He made beast noises in the back of his throat. He could not answer us when we shouted at him. He spat. I don't quite remember what followed, but I think that Strickland must have stunned him with the long boot jack, or else I should never have been able to sit on his chest. Fleet could not speak, he could only snarl, and his snarls were those of a wolf, not of a man. The human spirit must have been giving way all day and have died out with the twilight. We were dealing with a beast that had once been Fleet. The affair was beyond any human and rational experience. I tried to say hydrophobia, but the word wouldn't come, because I knew that I was lying. We bound this beast with leather thongs of the punka rope, and tied its thumbs and big toes together, and gagged it with a shoehorn, which makes a very efficient gag if you know how to arrange it. Then we carried it into the dining room, and sent a man to do Moyes, the doctor, telling him to come over at once. After we had dispatched the messenger and were drawing breath, Strickland said, "It's no good. This isn't any doctor's work." I, also, knew that he spoke the truth. The beast's head was free, and it threw it about from side to side. Anyone entering the room would have believed that we were curing a wolf's pelt. That was the most loathsome accessory of all. Strickland sat with his chin in the heel of his fist, watching the beast as it wriggled on the ground, but saying nothing. The shirt had been torn open in the scuffle and showed the black rosette mark on the left breast. It stood out like a blister. In the silence of the watching we heard something without mewing like a she-otter. We both rose to our feet, and, I answer for myself, not Strickland, felt sick, actually and physically sick. We told each other, as did the men in Pinafore, that it was the cat. Dumois arrived, and I never saw a little man so unprofessionally shocked. He said that it was a heart-rending case of hydrophobia, and that nothing could be done. At least any palliative measures would only prolong the agony. The beast was foaming at the mouth. Fleet, as we told Dumois, had been bitten by dogs once or twice. Any man who keeps half a dozen terriers must expect a nip now and again. Dumois could offer no help. He could only certify that Fleet was dying of hydrophobia. The beast was then howling, for it had managed to spit out the shoehorn. Dumois said that he would be ready to certify to the cause of death, and that the end was certain. He was a good little man, and he offered to remain with us, but Strickland refused the kindness. He did not wish to poison Dumois's New Year. He would only ask him not to give the real cause of Fleet's death to the public. So Dumois left, deeply agitated, and as soon as the noise of the cartwheels had died away, Strickland told me, in a whisper, his suspicions. They were so wildly improbable that he dared not say them out aloud, and I, who entertained all Strickland's beliefs, was so ashamed of owning to them that I pretended to disbelieve. Even if the Silver Man had bewitched Fleet for polluting the image of Hanuman, the punishment could not have fallen so quickly. As I was whispering this, the cry outside the house rose again, and the beast fell into a fresh paroxysm of struggling till we were afraid that the thongs that held it would give way. "Watch," said Strickland. "If this happens 6 times I shall take the law into my own hands. I order you to help me." He went into his room and came out in a few minutes with the barrels of an old shotgun, a piece of fishing line, some thick cord, and his heavy wooden bedstead. I reported that the convulsions had followed the cry by 2 seconds in each case, and the beast seemed perceptibly weaker. Strickland muttered, "But he can't take away the life. He can't take away the life." I said, though I knew that I was arguing against myself, "It may be a cat. It must be a cat. If the Silver Man is responsible, why does he dare to come here?" Strickland arranged the wood on the hearth, put the gun barrels into the glow of the fire, spread the twine on the table and broke a walking stick in 2. There was 1 yard of fishing line, gut, lapped with wire, such as is used for mahseer fishing, and he tied the two ends together in a loop. Then he said, "How can we catch him? He must be taken alive and unhurt." I said that we must trust in Providence, and go out softly with polo sticks into the shrubbery at the front of the house. The man or animal that made the cry was evidently moving round the house as regularly as a night watchman. We could wait in the bushes till he came by and knock him over. Strickland accepted this suggestion, and we slipped out from a bathroom window into the front veranda and then across the carriage drive into the bushes. In the moonlight we could see the leper coming round the corner of the house. He was perfectly naked, and from time to time he mewed and stopped to dance with his shadow. It was an unattractive sight, and thinking of poor Fleet, brought to such degradation by so foul a creature, I put away all my doubts and resolved to help Strickland from the heated gun barrels to the loop of twine from the loins to the head and back again, with all tortures that might be needful. The leper halted in the front porch for a moment and we jumped out on him with the sticks. He was wonderfully strong, and we were afraid that he might escape or be fatally injured before we caught him. We had an idea that lepers were frail creatures, but this proved to be incorrect. Strickland knocked his legs from under him and I put my foot on his neck. He mewed hideously, and even through my riding boots I could feel that his flesh was not the flesh of a clean man. He struck at us with his hand and feet stumps. We looped the lash of a dog whip round him, under the armpits, and dragged him backwards into the hall and so into the dining room where the beast lay. There we tied him with trunk straps. He made no attempt to escape, but mewed. When we confronted him with the beast, the scene was beyond description. The beast doubled backwards into a bow as though he had been poisoned with strychnine, and moaned in the most pitiable fashion. Several other things happened also, but they cannot be put down here. "I think I was right," said Strickland. "Now we will ask him to cure this case." But the leper only mewed. Strickland wrapped a towel round his hand and took the gun barrels out of the fire. I put the half of the broken walking stick through the loop of fishing line and buckled the leper comfortably to Strickland's bedstead. I understood then how men and women and little children can endure to see a witch burnt alive, for the beast was moaning on the floor, and though the silver man had no face, you could see horrible feelings passing through the slab that took its place, exactly as waves of heat play across red-hot iron, gun barrels for instance. Strickland shaded his eyes with his hands for a moment and we got to work. This part is not to be printed. The dawn was beginning to break when the leper spoke. His mewings had not been satisfactory up to that point. The beast had fainted from exhaustion and the house was very still. We unstrapped the leper and told him to take away the evil spirit. He crawled to the beast and laid his hand upon the left breast. That was all. Then he fell face down and whined, drawing in his breath as he did so. We watched the face of the beast, and saw the soul of Fleet coming back into the eyes. Then a sweat broke out on the forehead and the eyes, they were human eyes, closed. We waited for an hour but Fleet still slept. We carried him to his room and bade the leper go, giving him the bedstead, and the sheet on the bedstead to cover his nakedness, the gloves and the towels with which we had touched him, and the whip that had been hooked round his body. He put the sheet about him and went out into the early morning without speaking or mewing. Strickland wiped his face and sat down. A night gong, far away in the city, made 7 o'clock. "Exactly 24 hours," said Strickland. "And I've done enough to ensure my dismissal from the service, besides permanent quarters in a lunatic asylum. Do you believe that we are awake?" The red-hot gun barrel had fallen on the floor and was singeing the carpet. The smell was entirely real. That morning at 11 we two together went to wake up Fleet. We looked and saw that the black leopard rosette on his chest had disappeared. He was very drowsy and tired, but as soon as he saw us, he said, "Oh, confound you fellows! Happy New Year to you! Never mix your liquors. I'm nearly dead. Thanks for your kindness, but you're over time," said Strickland. "Today is the morning of the 2nd. You've slept the clock round with a vengeance." The door opened, and little Dumoise put his head in. He had come on foot, and fancied that we were laving out Fleet. "I've brought a nurse," said Dumoise. "I suppose that she can come in for what is necessary." "By all means," said Fleet cheerily, sitting up in bed. "Bring on your nurses." Dumoise was dumb. Strickland led him out and explained that there must have been a mistake in the diagnosis. Dumoise remained dumb and left the house hastily. He considered that his professional reputation had been injured, and was inclined to make a personal matter of the recovery. Strickland went out too. When he came back, he said that he had been to call on the temple of Hanuman to offer redress for the pollution of the god, and had been solemnly assured that no white man had ever touched the idol and that he was an incarnation of all the virtues laboring under a delusion. "What do you think?" said Strickland. I said, "There are more things," but Strickland hates that quotation. He says that I have worn it threadbare. One other curious thing happened which frightened me as much as anything in all the night's work. When Fleet was dressed, he came into the dining room and sniffed. He had a quaint trick of moving his nose when he sniffed. "Horrid doggy smell, here," said he. "You should really keep those terriers of yours in better order. Try sulphur, Strick." But Strickland did not answer. He caught hold of the back of a chair, and, without warning, went into an amazing fit of hysterics. It is terrible to see a strong man overtaken with hysteria. Then it struck me that we had fought for Fleet's soul with the silver man in that room, and had disgraced ourselves as Englishmen forever, and I laughed and gasped and gurgled just as shamefully as Strickland, while Fleet thought that we had both gone mad. We never told him what we had done. Some years later, when Strickland had married and was a church-going member of society for his wife's sake, we reviewed the incident dispassionately, and Strickland suggested that I should put it before the public. I cannot myself see that this step is likely to clear up the mystery, because, in the first place, no one will believe a rather unpleasant story, and, in the second, it is well known to every right-minded man that the gods of the heathen are stone and brass, and any attempt to deal with them otherwise is justly condemned. The return of Imre. The doors were wide. The story saith, out of the night came the patient wraith. He might not speak, and he could not stir a hair of the baron's minever. Speechless and strengthless, a shadow thin, he roved the castle to seek his kin. And oh, 'twas a piteous thing to see the dumb ghost follow his enemy. The Baron. Imre achieved the impossible. Without warning, for no conceivable motive, in his youth, at the threshold of his career he chose to disappear from the world, which is to say, the little Indian station where he lived. Upon a day he was alive, well, happy, and in great evidence among the billiard tables at his club. Upon a morning, he was not, and no manner of search could make sure where he might be. He had stepped out of his place, he had not appeared at his office at the proper time, and his dog-cart was not upon the public roads. For these reasons, and because he was hampering, in a microscopical degree, the administration of the Indian Empire, that empire paused for one microscopical moment to make inquiry into the fate of Imre. Ponds were dragged, wells were plumbed, telegrams were dispatched down the lines of railways and to the nearest seaport town 1,200 miles away, but Imre was not at the end of the drag ropes nor the telegraph wires. He was gone, and his place knew him no more. Then the work of the great Indian Empire swept forward, because it could not be delayed, and Imre from being a man became a mystery, such a thing as men talk over at their tables in the club for a month, and then forget utterly. His guns, horses, and carts were sold to the highest bidder. His superior officer wrote an altogether absurd letter to his mother, saying that Imre had unaccountably disappeared, and his bungalow stood empty. After 3 or 4 months of the scorching hot weather had gone by, my friend Strickland, of the police, saw fit to rent the bungalow from the native landlord. This was before he was engaged to Miss Yuffle, an affair which has been described in another place, and while he was pursuing his investigations into native life. His own life was sufficiently peculiar, and men complained of his manners and customs. There was always food in his house, but there were no regular times for meals. He ate, standing up and walking about, whatever he might find at the sideboard, and this is not good for human beings. His domestic equipment was limited to 6 rifles, 3 shotguns, 5 saddles, and a collection of stiff-jointed mace rods, bigger and stronger than the largest salmon rods. These occupied 1/2 of his bungalow, and the other half was given up to Strickland and his dog Tietjens, an enormous ramperslut who devoured daily the rations of 2 men. She spoke to Strickland in a language of her own, and whenever, walking abroad, she saw things calculated to destroy the peace of Her Majesty the Queen Empress, she returned to her master and laid information. Strickland would take steps at once, and the end of his labors was trouble and fine and imprisonment for other people. The natives believed that Tietjens was a familiar spirit, and treated her with the great reverence that is born of hate and fear. One room in the bungalow was set apart for her special use. She owned a bedstead, a blanket, and a drinking trough, and if anyone came into Strickland's room at night, her custom was to knock down the invader and give tongue till someone came with a light. Strickland owed his life to her, when he was on the frontier, in search of a local murderer, who came in the grey dawn to send Strickland much farther than the Andaman Islands. Tietjens caught the man as he was crawling into Strickland's tent with a dagger between his teeth, and after his record of iniquity was established in the eyes of the law, he was hanged. From that date Tietjens wore a collar of rough silver, and employed a monogram on her night blanket, and the blanket was of double-woven cashmere cloth, for she was a delicate dog. Under no circumstances would she be separated from Strickland, and once, when he was ill with fever, made great trouble for the doctors, because she did not know how to help her master and would not allow another creature to attempt aid. Makarnat, of the Indian Medical Service, beat her over her head with a gun butt before she could understand that she must give room for those who could give quinine. A short time after Strickland had taken Imre's bungalow, my business took me through that station, and naturally, the club quarters being full, I quartered myself upon Strickland. It was a desirable bungalow, 8-roomed and heavily thatched against any chance of leakage from rain. Under the pitch of the roof ran a ceiling cloth which looked just as neat as a whitewashed ceiling. The landlord had repainted it when Strickland took the bungalow. Unless you knew how Indian bungalows were built, you would never have suspected that above the cloth lay the dark three-cornered cavern of the roof, where the beams and the underside of the thatch harbored all manner of rats, bats, ants, and foul things. Tietjens met me in the veranda with a bay like the boom of the bell of St. Paul's, putting her paws on my shoulder to show she was glad to see me. Strickland had contrived to claw together a sort of meal which he called lunch, and immediately after it was finished went out about his business. I was left alone with Tietjens and my own affairs. The heat of the summer had broken up and turned to the warm damp of the rains. There was no motion in the heated air, but the rain fell like ramrods on the earth, and flung up a blue mist when it splashed back. The bamboos, and the custard apples, the poinsettias, and the mango trees in the garden stood still while the warm water lashed through them, and the frogs began to sing among the aloe hedges. A little before the light failed, and when the rain was at its worst, I sat in the back veranda and heard the water roar from the eaves, and scratched myself because I was covered with the thing called prickly heat. Tietjens came out with me and put her head in my lap and was very sorrowful, so I gave her biscuits when tea was ready, and I took tea in the back veranda on account of the little coolness found there. The rooms of the house were dark behind me. I could smell Strickland's saddlery and the oil on his guns, and I had no desire to sit among these things. My own servant came to me in the twilight, the muslin of his clothes clinging tightly to his drenched body, and told me that a gentleman had called and wished to see someone. Very much against my will, but only because of the darkness of the rooms, I went into the naked drawing room, telling my man to bring the lights. There might or might not have been a caller waiting. It seemed to me that I saw a figure by one of the windows, but when the lights came there was nothing save the spikes of the rain without, and the smell of the drinking earth in my nostrils. I explained to my servant that he was no wiser than he ought to be, and went back to the veranda to talk to Tietjens. She had gone out into the wet, and I could hardly coax her back to me, even with biscuits with sugar tops. Strickland came home, dripping wet, just before dinner, and the first thing he said was, "Has anyone called?" I explained, with apologies, that my servant had summoned me into the drawing room on a false alarm, or that some loafer had tried to call on Strickland, and thinking better of it had fled after giving his name. Strickland ordered dinner, without comment, and since it was a real dinner with a white tablecloth attached, we sat down. At 9 o'clock Strickland wanted to go to bed, and I was tired too. Tietjens, who had been lying underneath the table, rose up, and swung into the least exposed veranda as soon as her master moved to his own room, which was next to the stately chamber set apart for Tietjens. If a mere wife had wished to sleep out of doors in that pelting rain it would not have mattered, but Tietjens was a dog, and therefore the better animal. I looked at Strickland, expecting to see him flay her with a whip. He smiled queerly, as a man would smile after telling some unpleasant domestic tragedy. "She has done this ever since I moved in here," said he. "Let her go." The dog was Strickland's dog, so I said nothing, but I felt all that Strickland felt in being thus made light of. Tietjens encamped outside my bedroom window, and storm after storm came up, thundered on the thatch, and died away. The lightning spattered the sky as a thrown egg spatters a barn door, but the light was pale blue, not yellow, and, looking through my split bamboo blinds, I could see the great dog standing, not sleeping, in the veranda, the hackles alift on her back and her feet anchored as tensely as the drawn wire rope of a suspension bridge. In the very short pauses of the thunder I tried to sleep, but it seemed that someone wanted me very urgently. He, whoever he was trying to call me by name, but his voice was no more than a husky whisper. The thunder ceased, and Tietjens went into the garden and howled at the low moon. Somebody tried to open my door, walked about and about through the house and stood breathing heavily in the verandas, and just when I was falling asleep I fancied that I heard a wild hammering and clamoring above my head or on the door. I ran into Strickland's room and asked him whether he was ill, and had been calling for me. He was lying on his bed half-dressed, a pipe in his mouth. "I thought you'd come," he said. "Have I been walking round the house recently?" I explained that he had been tramping in the dining room and the smoking room and 2 or 3 other places, and he laughed and told me to go back to bed. I went back to bed and slept till the morning, but through all my mixed dreams I was sure I was doing someone an injustice in not attending to his wants. What those wants were I could not tell, but a fluttering, whispering, bolt fumbling, lurking, loitering someone was reproaching me for my slackness, and, half awake, I heard the howling of Tietjens in the garden and the threshing of the rain. I lived in that house for 2 days. Strickland went to his office daily, leaving me alone for 8 or 10 hours with Tietjens for my only companion. As long as the full light lasted I was comfortable, and so was Tietjens, but in the twilight she and I moved into the back veranda and cuddled each other for company. We were alone in the house, but nonetheless it was much too fully occupied by a tenant with whom I did not wish to interfere. I never saw him, but I could see the curtains between the rooms quivering where he had just passed through. I could hear the chairs creaking as the bamboos sprung under a weight that had just quitted them, and I could feel when I went to get a book from the dining room that somebody was waiting in the shadows of the front veranda till I should have gone away. Tietjens made the twilight more interesting by glaring into the darkened rooms with every hair erect, and following the motions of something that I could not see. She never entered the rooms, but her eyes moved interestedly. That was quite sufficient. Only when my servant came to trim the lamps and make all light and habitable she would come in with me and spend her time sitting on her haunches, watching an invisible extra man as he moved about behind my shoulder. Dogs are cheerful companions. I explained to Strickland, gently as might be, that I would go over to the club and find for myself quarters there. I admired his hospitality, was pleased with his guns and rods, but I did not much care for his house and its atmosphere. He heard me out to the end, and then smiled very wearily, but without contempt, for he is a man who understands things. "Stay on," he said, "and see what this thing means. All you have talked about I have known since I took the bungalow. Stay on and wait. Tietjens has left me. Are you going to?" I had seen him through one little affair, connected with a heathen idol, that had brought me to the doors of a lunatic asylum, and I had no desire to help him through further experiences. He was a man to whom unpleasantnesses arrived as do dinners to ordinary people. Therefore I explained more clearly than ever that I liked him immensely, and would be happy to see him in the daytime, but that I did not care to sleep under his roof. This was after dinner, when Tietjens had gone out to lie in the veranda. "'Pon my soul, I don't wonder," said Strickland, with his eyes on the ceiling cloth. "Look at that." The tails of 2 brown snakes were hanging between the cloth and the cornice of the wall. They threw long shadows in the lamplight. "If you are afraid of snakes, of course," said Strickland. "I hate and fear snakes, because if you look into the eyes of any snake you will see that it knows all and more of the mystery of man's fall, and that it feels all the contempt that the devil felt when Adam was evicted from Eden. Besides which its bite is generally fatal, and it twists up trouser legs." "You ought to get your thatch overhauled," I said. "Give me a massey rod, and we'll poke 'em down." "They'll hide among the roof beams," said Strickland. "I can't stand snakes overhead. I'm going up into the roof. If I shake 'em down, stand by with a cleaning rod and break their backs." I was not anxious to assist Strickland in his work, but I took the cleaning rod and waited in the dining room, while Strickland brought a gardener's ladder from the veranda, and set it against the side of the room. The snake tails drew themselves up and disappeared. We could hear the dry rushing scuttle of long bodies running over the baggy ceiling cloth. Strickland took a lamp with him, while I tried to make clear to him the danger of hunting roof snakes between a ceiling cloth and a thatch, apart from the deterioration of property caused by ripping out ceiling cloths. "Nonsense," said Strickland. "They're sure to hide near the walls by the cloth. The bricks are too cold for 'em, and the heat of the room is just what they like." He put his hand to the corner of the stuff and ripped it from the cornice. It gave with a great sound of tearing, and Strickland put his head through the opening into the dark of the angle of the roof beams. I set my teeth and lifted the rod, for I had not the least knowledge of what might descend. Said Strickland, and his voice rolled and rumbled in the roof. "There's room for another set of rooms up here, and, by Jove, someone is occupying 'em." "Snakes?" I said from below. "No. It's a buffalo. Hand me up the two last joints of a macer rod, and I'll prod it. It's lying on the main roof beam." I handed up the rod. "What a nest for owls and serpents. No wonder the snakes live here," said Strickland, climbing farther into the roof. I could see his elbow thrusting with the rod. "Come out of that, whoever you are. Head's below there. It's falling." I saw the ceiling cloth nearly in the center of the room bag with a shape that was pressing it downwards and downwards towards the lighted lamp on the table. I snatched the lamp out of danger and stood back. Then the cloth ripped out from the walls, tore, split, swayed, and shot down upon the table, something that I dared not look at, till Strickland had slid down the ladder and was standing by my side. He did not say much, being a man of few words, but he picked up the loose end of the tablecloth and threw it over the remnants on the table. "It strikes me," said he, putting down the lamp, "our friend Imre has come back." "Oh. You would you?" There was a movement under the cloth, and a little snake wriggled out, to be back broken by the butt of the macer rod. I was sufficiently sick to make no remarks worth recording. Strickland meditated, and helped himself to drinks. The arrangement under the cloth made no more signs of life. "Is it Imre?" I said. Strickland turned back the cloth for a moment, and looked. "It is Imre," he said, "and his throat is cut from ear to ear." Then we spoke, both together and to ourselves. That's why he whispered about the house. Tietjens, in the garden, began to bay furiously. A little later her great nose heaved open the dining room door. She sniffed and was still. The tattered ceiling cloth hung down almost to the level of the table, and there was hardly room to move away from the discovery. Tietjens came in and sat down, her teeth bared under her lip and her forepaws planted. She looked at Strickland. "It's a bad business, old lady," said he. "Men don't climb up into the roofs of their bungalows to die, and they don't fasten up the ceiling cloth behind 'em. Let's think it out." "Let's think it out somewhere else," I said. "Excellent idea. Turn the lamps out." We'll get into my room. I did not turn the lamps out. I went into Strickland's room first, and allowed him to make the darkness. Then he followed me, and we lit tobacco and thought. Strickland thought. I smoked furiously, because I was afraid. Imre is back, said Strickland. The question is, who killed Imre? Don't talk, I've a notion of my own. When I took this bungalow I took over most of Imre's servants. Imre was guileless and inoffensive, wasn't he? I agreed, though the heap under the cloth had looked neither one thing nor the other. If I call in all the servants they will stand fast in a crowd and lie like Aryans. What do you suggest? Call them in one by one, I said. They'll run away and give the news to all their fellows, said Strickland. We must segregate them. Do you suppose your servant knows anything about it? He may, for aught I know, but I don't think it's likely. He has only been here 2 or 3 days, I answered. What's your notion? I can't quite tell. How the dickens did the man get the wrong side of the ceiling cloth? There was a heavy coughing outside Strickland's bedroom door. This showed that Bahadur Khan, his body servant, had waked from sleep and wished to put Strickland to bed. Come in, said Strickland. It's a very warm night, isn't it? Bahadur Khan, a great, green-turbaned, 6-foot Mohammedan, said that it was a very warm night, but that there was more rain pending, which, by his honour's favour, would bring relief to the country. It will be so, if God pleases, said Strickland, tugging off his boots. It is in my mind, Bahadur Khan, that I have worked thee remorselessly for many days, ever since that time when thou first earnest into my service. What time was that? Has the heaven-born forgotten? It was when Imre Sahib went secretly to Europe without warning given, and I came into the honoured service of the protector of the poor. And Imre Sahib went to Europe. It is so said among those who were his servants. And thou wilt take service with him when he returns. Assuredly, Sahib. He was a good master, and cherished his dependents. That is true. I am very tired, but I go buck shooting tomorrow. Give me the little sharp rifle that I use for black buck, it is in the case yonder. The man stooped over the case, handed barrels, stock, and fore-end to Strickland, who fitted all together, yawning dolefully. Then he reached down to the gun case, took a solid drawn cartridge, and slipped it into the breech of the 360 Express. And Imre Sahib has gone to Europe secretly. That is very strange, Bahadur Khan, is it not? What do I know of the ways of the white man? Heaven-born. Very little, truly. But thou shalt know more anon. It has reached me that Imre Sahib has returned from his so long journeyings, and that even now he lies in the next room, waiting his servant. Sahib. The lamplight slid along the barrels of the rifle as they levelled themselves at Bahadur Khan's broad breast. Go and look, said Strickland. Take a lamp. Thy master is tired, and he waits thee. Go. The man picked up a lamp, and went into the dining room, Strickland following, and almost pushing him with the muzzle of the rifle. He looked for a moment at the black depths behind the ceiling cloth, at the writhing snake underfoot, and last, a grey glaze settling on his face, at the thing under the tablecloth. "Hast thou seen?" said Strickland after a pause. "I have seen. I am clay in the white man's hands. What does the presence do? Hang thee within the month. What else? For killing him. Nay, Sahib, consider. Walking among us, his servants, he cast his eyes upon my child, who was 4 years old. Him he bewitched, and in 10 days he died of the fever, my child. What said Imre Sahib? He said he was a handsome child, and patted him on the head, wherefore my child died. Wherefore I killed Imre Sahib in the twilight, when he had come back from office, and was sleeping. Wherefore I dragged him up into the roof beams and made all fast behind him. The heaven-born knows all things. I am the servant of the heaven-born." Strickland looked at me above the rifle, and said, in the vernacular, "Thou art witness to this saying. He has killed." Bahadur Khan stood ashen grey in the light of the one lamp. The need for justification came upon him very swiftly. "I am trapped," he said, "but the offence was that man's. He cast an evil eye upon my child, and I killed and hid him. Only such as are served by devils." He glared at Tietjens, couched stolidly before him, "only such could know what I did. It was clever. But thou shouldst have lashed him to the beam with a rope. Now, thou thyself wilt hang by a rope." "Orderly." A drowsy policeman answered Strickland's call. He was followed by another, and Tietjens sat wondrous still. "Take him to the police station," said Strickland. "There is a case toward." "Do I hang, then?" said Bahadur Khan, making no attempt to escape, and keeping his eyes on the ground. "If the sun shines or the water runs, yes," said Strickland. Bahadur Khan stepped back one long pace, quivered, and stood still. The 2 policemen waited further orders. "Go," said Strickland. "Nay, but I go very swiftly," said Bahadur Khan. "Look. I am even now a dead man." He lifted his foot, and to the little toe there clung the head of the half-killed snake, firm fixed in the agony of death. "I come of land-holding stock," said Bahadur Khan, rocking where he stood. "It were a disgrace to me to go to the public scaffold, therefore I take this way. Be it remembered that the Sahib's shirts are correctly enumerated, and that there is an extra piece of soap in his wash basin. My child was bewitched, and I slew the wizard. Why should you seek to slay me with the rope? My honor is saved, and I die." At the end of an hour he died, as they die who are bitten by the little brown carrot, and the policeman bore him and the thing under the tablecloth to their appointed places. All were needed to make clear the disappearance of Imre. "This," said Strickland, very calmly, as he climbed into bed, is called the 19th century. Did you hear what that man said? I heard, I answered. Imre made a mistake. Simply and solely through not knowing the nature of the Oriental, and the coincidence of a little seasonal fever. Bahadur Khan had been with him for 4 years. I shuddered. My own servant had been with me for exactly that length of time. When I went over to my own room I found my man waiting, impassive as the copperhead on a penny, to pull off my boots. What has befallen Bahadur Khan? Said I. He was bitten by a snake and died. The rest the Sahib knows, was the answer. And how much of this matter hast thou known? As much as might be gathered from one coming in the twilight to seek satisfaction. Gently, Sahib. Let me pull off those boots. I had just settled to the sleep of exhaustion when I heard Strickland shouting from his side of the house, Tietjens has come back to her place. And so she had. The great Deround was couched statelily on her own bedstead on her own blanket, while, in the next room, the idle, empty, ceiling cloth waggled as it trailed on the table. Namgay Dula there came to the beach a poor exile of Erin. The dew on his wet robe hung heavy and chill, ere the steamer that brought him had passed out of hearing. He was Alderman Mike introduce in a bill. American song. Once upon a time there was a king who lived on the road to Thibet, very many miles in the Himalayas. His kingdom was 11,000 feet above the sea and exactly 4 miles square, but most of the miles stood on end owing to the nature of the country. His revenues were rather less than £400 yearly, and they were expended in the maintenance of 1 elephant and a standing army of 5 men. He was tributary to the Indian government, who allowed him certain sums for keeping a section of the Himalaya-Thibet road in repair. He further increased his revenues by selling timber to the railway companies, for he would cut the great deodar trees in his one forest, and they fell thundering into the Sutlej River and were swept down to the plains 300 miles away and became railway ties. Now and again this king, whose name does not matter, would mount a ring-straked horse and ride scores of miles to Simla town to confer with the lieutenant governor on matters of state, or to assure the viceroy that his sword was at the service of the Queen Empress. Then the viceroy would cause a ruffle of drums to be sounded, and the ring-straked horse and the cavalry of the state, 2 men in tatters, and the herald who bore the silver stick before the king would trot back to their own place, which lay between the tail of a heaven-climbing glacier and a dark birch forest. Now, from such a king, always remembering that he possessed one veritable elephant, and could count his descent for 1200 years, I expected, when it was my fate to wander through his dominions, no more than mere license to live. The night had closed in rain, and rolling clouds blotted out the lights of the villages in the valley. 40 miles away, untouched by cloud or storm, the white shoulder of Dongapa, the mountain of the Council of the Gods, upheld the evening star. The monkeys sang sorrowfully to each other as they hunted for dry roosts in the fern-wreathed trees, and the last puff of the day wind brought from the unseen villages the scent of damp wood smoke, hot cakes, dripping undergrowth, and rotting pine cones. That is the true smell of the Himalayas, and if once it creeps into the blood of a man, that man will at the last, forgetting all else, return to the hills to die. The clouds closed and the smell went away, and there remained nothing in all the world except chilling white mist and the boom of the Sutlej river racing through the valley below. A fat-tailed sheep, who did not want to die, bleated piteously at my tent door. He was scuffling with the Prime Minister and the Director General of Public Education, and he was a royal gift to me and my camp servants. I expressed my thanks suitably, and asked if I might have audience of the king. The Prime Minister readjusted his turban, which had fallen off in the struggle, and assured me that the king would be very pleased to see me. Therefore I dispatched 2 bottles as a foretaste, and when the sheep had entered upon another incarnation went to the king's palace through the wet. He had sent his army to escort me, but the army stayed to talk with my cook. Soldiers are very much alike all the world over. The palace was a 4-roomed and whitewashed mud and timber house, the finest in all the hills for a day's journey. The king was dressed in a purple velvet jacket, white muslin trousers, and a saffron yellow turban of price. He gave me audience in a little carpeted room opening off the palace courtyard, which was occupied by the elephant of state. The great beast was sheeted and anchored from trunk to tail, and the curve of his back stood out grandly against the mist. The Prime Minister and the Director General of Public Education were present to introduce me, but all the court had been dismissed, lest the 2 bottles aforesaid should corrupt their morals. The king cast a wreath of heavy-scented flowers round my neck as I bowed, and inquired how my honored presence had the felicity to be. I said that through seeing his auspicious countenance the mists of the night had turned into sunshine, and that by reason of his beneficent sheep his good deeds would be remembered by the gods. He said that since I had set my magnificent foot in his kingdom the crops would probably yield 70% more than the average. I said that the fame of the king had reached to the 4 corners of the earth, and that the nations gnashed their teeth when they heard daily of the glories of his realm and the wisdom of his moon-like Prime Minister and lotus-like Director General of Public Education. Then we sat down on clean white cushions, and I was at the king's right hand. 3 minutes later he was telling me that the state of the maize crop was something disgraceful, and that the railway companies would not pay him enough for his timber. The talk shifted to and fro with the bottles, and we discussed very many stately things, and the king became confidential on the subject of government generally. Most of all he dwelt on the shortcomings of one of his subjects, who, from all I could gather, had been paralyzing the executive. In the old days, said the king, I could have ordered the elephant yonder to trample him to death. Now I must e'en send him 70 miles across the hills to be tried, and his keep would be upon the state. The elephant eats everything. What be the man's crimes, Raja Sahib? Said I. Firstly, he is an outlander and no man of mine own people. Secondly, since of my favor I gave him land upon his first coming, he refuses to pay revenue. Am I not the lord of the earth, above and below, entitled by right and custom to 1/8 of the crop? Yet this devil, establishing himself, refuses to pay a single tax, and he brings a poisonous spawn of babes. Cast him into jail, I said. Sahib, the king answered, shifting a little on the cushions. Once and only once in these 40 years sickness came upon me so that I was not able to go abroad. In that hour I made a vow to my God that I would never again cut man or woman from the light of the sun and the air of God, for I perceived the nature of the punishment. How can I break my vow? Were it only the lopping of a hand or a foot I should not delay. But even that is impossible now that the English have rule. One or another of my people, he looked obliquely at the Director General of Public Education, would at once write a letter to the Viceroy, and perhaps I should be deprived of my ruffle of drums. He unscrewed the mouthpiece of his silver water pipe, fitted a plain amber mouthpiece, and passed his pipe to me. Not content with refusing revenue, he continued, "This outlander refuses also the buga." This was the corvée or forced labor on the roads, and stirs my people up to the like treason. Yet he is, when he wills, an expert log snatcher. There is none better or bolder among my people to clear a block of the river when the logs stick fast. But he worships strange gods, said the Prime Minister deferentially. For that I have no concern, said the king, who was as tolerant as Akbar in matters of belief. To each man his own God and the fire or Mother Earth for us all at last. It is the rebellion that offends me. The king has an army, I suggested. Has not the king burned the man's house and left him naked to the night dews? Nay, a hut is a hut, and it holds the life of a man. But once, I sent my army against him when his excuses became wearisome. Of their heads he brake 3 across the top with a stick. The other 2 men ran away. Also the guns would not shoot. I had seen the equipment of the infantry. 1/3 of it was an old muzzle-loading fowling piece, with a ragged rust hole where the nipples should have been, 1/3 a wire-bound matchlock with a worm-eaten stock, and 1/3 a 4-bore flint duck gun without a flint. But it is to be remembered, said the king, reaching out for the bottle, that he is a very expert log snatcher and a man of a merry face. What shall I do to him, Sahib? This was interesting. The timid hill folk would as soon have refused taxes to their king as revenues to their gods. If it be the king's permission, I said, I will not strike my tents till the 3rd day, and I will see this man. The mercy of the king is godlike, and rebellion is like unto the sin of witchcraft. Moreover, both the bottles and another be empty. You have my leave to go, said the king. Next morning a crier went through the state proclaiming that there was a logjam on the river and that it behoved all loyal subjects to remove it. The people poured down from their villages to the moist warm valley of poppy fields, and the king and I went with them. Hundreds of dressed deodar logs had caught on a snag of rock, and the river was bringing down more logs every minute to complete the blockade. The water snarled and wrenched and worried at the timber, and the population of the state began prodding the nearest logs with a pole in the hope of starting a general movement. Then there went up a shout of Namgay Dula. Namgay Dula, and a large red-haired villager hurried up, stripping off his clothes as he ran. "That is he. That is the rebel," said the king. "Now will the dam be cleared?" "But why has he red hair?" I asked, since red hair among hill folks is as common as blue or green. "He is an outlander," said the king. "Well done. Oh, well done." Namgay Doola had scrambled out on the jam and was clawing out the butt of a log with a rude sort of boat hook. It slid forward slowly as an alligator moves. 3 or 4 others followed it, and the green water spouted through the gaps they had made. Then the villagers howled and shouted and scrambled across the logs, pulling and pushing the obstinate timber, and the red head of Namgay Doola was chief among them all. The logs swayed and chafed and groaned as fresh consignments from upstream battered the now weakening dam. All gave way at last in a smother of foam, racing logs, bobbing black heads and confusion indescribable. The river tossed everything before it. I saw the red head go down with the last remnants of the jam and disappear between the great grinding tree trunks. It rose close to the bank and blowing like a grampus. Namgay Doola wrung the water out of his eyes and made obeisance to the king. I had time to observe him closely. The virulent redness of his shock head and beard was most startling, and in the thicket of hair wrinkled above high cheekbones shone 2 very merry blue eyes. He was indeed an outlander, but yet a Thibetan in language, habit, and attire. He spoke the Lepcha dialect with an indescribable softening of the gutturals. It was not so much a lisp as an accent. "Whence comest thou?" I asked. "From Thibet." He pointed across the hills and grinned. That grin went straight to my heart. Mechanically I held out my hand and Namgay Doola shook it. No pure Thibetan would have understood the meaning of the gesture. He went away to look for his clothes.